Right, perfect. So welcome to this week's office hours. We're going live again, switching up from last week. It was kind of cool to have somebody join us last week for the first time. We had David Kim jump on, which was kind of fun. So this week we're excited to jump, really dive deep into customer questions, feedback. One thing, and by the way, like let me throw this up here too. As everybody's jumping in, we already have a ton of people jumping in relatively fast, so this is awesome. Go ahead and throw in your comments, questions. They can be Aura specific, they can be just seller general, kind of up to you. We're excited that you know we're speeding up the pace of development here, which is really awesome. So there's a few things like Maven related. I know I was on a customer call yesterday talking about some different tweaks to Maven. There's some interesting behaviors we can begin adding or playing around with. So we're actually looking into those now. There's an interesting bug for Android when you're trying to edit your price. So actually we're getting that fixed for everyone this week, which is pretty exciting. Um, and yeah, a lot of more data, right? More data, more data, more data. This is something we geek out a lot with, even internally. But yeah, a lot of stuff happening. But Casey, what's top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think top of mind for me is definitely just taking more advantage of that feedback. I think it's feedback at goaura.com. Like we talked about, just data is super nice to have and able to just kind of point yourself in the right direction as a seller, but also for us internally, kind of taking you the requests from various folks and prioritizing those based on other people upvoting them. So yeah, if you do have any recommendations or requests for us folks, definitely check out that page, see if your request is already there. If it is, toss an upvote on it, and if not, feel free to make a new post there so we can kind of prioritize and see where your request may lie on the roadmap there.
Yeah, so we're reviewing this weekly now. Quick check, having conversations, reaching out to those people to say, hey, maybe there's something we need to beta test. You requested this, you commented on it. We'd love for you to be the first, handful of people to begin beta testing this. But there's a few things, and you can actually see it on feedback.goaura.com. You can see if you go to the roadmap tab, what's being planned, what's under review, things we're considering, and really having detailed conversations around. A lot of stuff coming your way, which is pretty exciting here. Outside of things that we obviously can't talk about because there's some fun stuff coming too that I'll tease slightly there without giving too much away. Um, Man, it feels like let's see what we're going into the last week of January. The first month is already flying by, which is dumbfounding to me. Um, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. We're trying to keep up just with the speed of things. I feel like internally, we're moving incredibly fast. Everybody has a ton on their plate, which is awesome. But yeah, just time is flying right now. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older and I perceive it that way, or time is just really like flying right now. But I'm curious, like as we're 1 month into the year, how are you feeling so far? From what you're seeing in support, what sellers tend to be struggling with, kind of any trends that you're noticing so far.
In terms of kind of common issues that I'm seeing with folks, no real things come to mind initially. Kind of a combination of, we're migrating off of legacy Aura, so some folks trying to get migrated to Aura 1.0. If you haven't done that, definitely recommend doing that. Legacy Aura will eventually be phased out, but just better performance and more features on 1.0. As folks have done that migration, one thing I kind of wanted to emphasize today and make sure folks were aware of was the new features. Obviously, we talk about Maven AI a lot on Aura 1.0 and on our office hours, but specifically Hyperdrive, that is a massive impact and a big differentiator for us as a repricer compared to other tools. A lot of folks migrating over may not be using Hyperdrive or may not be familiar. Just lets us deploy those price changes much faster than a typical listing price change, if you will. So always recommend making sure you're using all of those credits depending on your current plan, and assigning those to either your most competitive, most successful listings for kind of the biggest impact there. But yeah, I definitely agree, Dylan. A kind of a quick start to the year, and it seems to have kind of flown by. Yeah, entering the last week of January does not feel correct. I feel like we're still at the
Yeah.
beginning, but
Yeah, it's like you might as well go ahead and start prepping for Q4 already for
yeah,
2024. Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, a good call out there. Good shout out. We will be deprecating, meaning that legacy Aura. So the old version will stop working about mid-February. We've been sending out emails as well as in-app banners there. So if you are currently using the old version of Aura, migrate to the new one. It takes less than 10 minutes. It's dramatically better, more features, like Casey was saying, better performance even. It's just so well worth the effort. And our team's obviously here if you get stuck at any point. Casey's spending a lot of his time jumping in with users who, if they hit a certain little issue, or they're just they have a few questions, we're here. That's what's exciting about working with us is you're not having to just read a support doc on how to do it yourself and good luck. Like we got you covered here, which is pretty exciting. Lane, good to see you. If this is the lane, I think it is. I think Keen just talked to you. Tasso and I talked to you yesterday. Happy to see you again. What we've been doing behind the scenes, by the way, is having a lot of user conversations. We're having a handful a day. Some are with new partners, which is awesome. We have a lot of people coming to Aura saying, "Hey, I want to partner up." My go-to recommendation for the software I recommend for repricing is really changing. That's now Aura. Let's have a deeper discussion there, as well as just a lot of people migrating to Aura from competitors recently, which has been pretty exciting. A few dramatic situations there that led to that we won't really go deep into, but welcome with open arms from our perspective, certainly. But yeah, that, and then just diving deep into specific questions. How are you as a seller solving certain problems? How are you thinking about certain tooling that you're using? We're really kind of thinking about the modern stack, right? The tech stack. We talk a lot about this in software. What's the stack? What's the tech stack? What are the tools really that you're using, and how do they work together? Like whenever you're adding a tool to your stack, it's important to think that through. It's important to understand what it can and can't do. What does it integrate or not integrate with? Because ideally what you're doing is you're making a pretty big bet. Luckily, you can jump in and start testing things in the software space relatively easy. But once you're taking this seriously, let's make a bet. What is my inventory management software? What is my repricing software? What is my reimbursement software, right? All these things do start to matter. And you really want to understand who's the best in the business in that one thing. And then understand, not just from a product perspective, who's the team behind it? How am I going to be supported? All these things. What's the future look like? I think that's another thing that we look at internally when we're adding a new tool, which we're doing right now, actually. We're migrating from one tool to another internally. And a lot of it comes down to who do you integrate with and what does the future look like for you guys? Because if you're actively building, making positive changes, and the vision for where you're taking the software is in alignment with what we need, it's an easier decision than it is what it is. And hopefully it works for you. So something to think about. Lane's, I love when users jump into office hours and try to elicit votes for their feedback. I'm going to throw it up here for everyone. This is a high price error listing deactivation feature request. This one's a little bit more complex because there's a lot of things that go into it. Amazon makes some things very easy for us to see as developers. Other things are a little bit more difficult to see or understand why they occurred. Definitely going to be an ongoing thing to evolve and work on. But yeah, I think, when we first rolled out Maven, we noticed that in the beta that was happening quite a bit. So we started to make a few tweaks and adjustments that really brought that down quite a bit, which is fantastic. There's still a few. That's the thing. There's not one thing that causes that, which is so crazy. In a way, you're kind of operating slightly blind in the sense of, for the most part, how things are going to work out, but sometimes you're like, didn't see that, potentially happening. So something to be aware of. But yeah, if anybody else is having that issue, about that with Lane there. Awesome. Yeah. So Lane popping in real quick. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, we definitely have the feedback. One thing we recently did is really tweak our user onboarding series. So basically, when are you getting banners, in-app chats, emails of how do you do certain things, right? What's your clear next step here? A lot of tools that we've experienced either as sellers or just in general don't tell you what the clear next step is. It's a lot of just jump in and figure it out. It's a big sandbox, but most software is built kind of in a opinionated way. There's a way to think about it, a way that it's designed to be used. And if that's not being taught to you, that kind of makes it more difficult. And so we actually built this so it's very behavioral, right? So like if you added your marketplace within 2 minutes, we're probably not going to send you an email on how to do that. You kind of got that figured out. We'll go to the next step for you. But in addition to that, we actually launched a user education series. So once you've onboarded, you're up and running, you're repricing. Now it's like, great, let's go deeper into the features, right? Like, are you using Maven? Are you using Hyperdrive credits? And what's nice is we did a massive data analysis to understand the difference between those who really get the value and those who don't. And so it's nice as every email we're sending you now is tailored to you to let you know, like, hey, maybe you're only using, I don't know, 10 out of your 25 hyperdrive credits, but we found that hitting 20 out of the 25, like using 20 out of 25, really lends itself to a better performance. We're going to make that recommendation to you. So a lot of hand holding there. But the last email in that sequence is letting you know, by the way, we want your feedback. Like, go in there. Here's where it's at. Upvote, add new things, add comments, add commentary, all the things. Because again, we're looking at this every single day, which is fantastic. So, we got a lot more people jumping in here. So as everybody's jumping in, go ahead and add comments. Let us know, what questions do you have about Aura, the product, any feedback you currently have, things you love, things you're kind of struggling with. There's a lot we're working on right now. But yeah, there's a lot, Casey, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot happening. A
Yes.
lot we
Yeah.
can't even share publicly.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of things behind the scenes, a lot of things center stage as well. A lot of moving pieces. Things are moving quickly, and we're just trying to keep up. But also kind of make some improvements or options that are going to be better for our users as well. So yeah, it's exciting stuff, and definitely a fast moving start to the year, as we mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's why it feels like it's been moving so fast for us. Is because we're doing so much in such
Mhm.
a scope down period of time that it's like it's weird. It should feel longer because we're doing so much, but we're doing so much at such a high, fast pace that um, it feels like we're living life at 2x speed is what it feels like. So
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah. Nice. Hopefully, if you haven't, by the way, our blog, we reactivated that quite a bit. So every Monday or Tuesday, depending on if there's a Monday holiday, which has been a lot the case the past like few months, we're releasing new blog posts every single Monday. So we're writing amazing content. We're really thinking about, how do we write content that we wish we could read and know and understand when we were sellers, right? Like what, and also like taking what like Casey and Finn, you guys are seeing in support, like what are the common things and say, great, like maybe we already know what the solution is there. Let's just go teach it. Or maybe, it's a mindset shift. Let's go ahead and talk about perspective and things like that. So we talk about a lot of the things that we see that we personally don't think is really being one acknowledged as like this is a thing, or two, here's how to do it, right? A lot, it's like networking is a great example. People are like, oh, you need to network with other sellers. Well, every person I tell that to is like, great, how do you do that? Like, you know, that doesn't necessarily describe how to do it. And so we actually wrote a blog post on exactly here's how to network and why it's a superpower. And we give you resources that, where we learned how to do that. So kind of passing things forward, paying it forward, if you will. It's been really fun. A lot of, blogs in the Amazon seller space tend to be very sales oriented or very fluffy for SEO. And we're certainly guilty of doing that, years and years ago because ranking for SEO is really fun. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to like what value are we providing per word, and that's where we really kind of transition how we think about writing content now. It's like every word has to fight for value to be there. It's been really fun. It's a lot of work. I will say that writing blog posts, I haven't done it in a while. Turns out it's a lot of work. But it's been fun. We kind of get to go full circle and go from again what Casey, you and Finn are seeing and support the common questions. Because actually, can you speak to how we handle support from the perspective of like it's not always Aura product related. It's sometimes a little bit more generalized as like for sellers.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination of making sure that folks are all set in the platform, if they're experiencing any issues in any specific areas of the platform, but then also kind of on a concept level, like, hey, this is what we recommend based on our experience. Obviously, Dylan, you and James have the experience directly as sellers, so kind of baking that into our recommendations and best practices. So it is kind of that nice balance of, hey, this is how you solve that problem in the platform. But I did also notice, hey, you've got some listings where maybe your minimum price is above the buy box. So kind of proactively helping folks not only solve problems but fine tune the performance of Aura and in turn their store as well. So it's really kind of a combination of all those things, and then like I mentioned, kind of that high concept thing. So even if we solve the problem, don't see any issues or things to worry about in your account, maybe making some recommendations. Hey, this is a trend we've seen recently based on your setup as an FBA or FBM seller. This is what we recommend for those scenarios. So really trying to cover as much of the entire Amazon selling ecosystem, not just the Aura specific issues or problems folks may be facing.
Yeah, this for me was super important when we first set things up. I wanted our, we don't even call it support, right? We call it success. Like we want our success team to be consultative and in the sense that we really read between the lines sometimes because sometimes a request comes through and it's like at face value like an Aura like feature problem, but then when you dig a little bit deeper and you ask why a few times, you realize, oh, it's actually this one thing like that has nothing to do with Aura as a, it has nothing to do with repricing as a concept. It's this other thing that we know we can help with, so like let's just go ahead and help. So instead of just saying, hey, like that has nothing to do with us, like go solve that problem, we're like, hey, here's resources that like we've seen work well. Here you go. Like we want you to succeed. We have a lot of new sellers that come to us, right? We were looking at this data the other day where like there's a decent amount of new sellers that get started with us. And they're still trying to figure out the business, right? They're still figuring out sourcing at scale. And we're already thinking through how do we provide education and knowledge to make that easier. Like it's not easy being a seller, right? There's so much already out there. There's so many courses and influencers to follow, and like some are awesome, some are kind of like not great, and it's hard to know which, right? When you're first getting into an industry, you just don't know. And with us, I think that we can really become that catalyst to say like, hey, like we vouch for this because like we know the people behind it, we've gone through it, like it's great content. That's what we recommend, and anything else like don't know, like can't say yes or no, but kind of give you like almost like a guide, right? I think that's the thing. If we think about the seller, right? I love the whole hero's journey kind of framework, and if we could be the guide that say, okay, you're struggling a little bit, you need to go here, here, and here, and then like you're going to be fine. That's pretty cool. So if we could streamline that approach, we can make you more effective, more efficient. We can help you avoid the pitfalls that we've just seen, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of users struggle with like directly. We're like, hey, that's a common thing. Don't beat yourself up for it, but like here's the solution. Here's how to avoid that moving forward. I remember Keen when we first started really alpha testing 1.0, we spun up an internal OA account so we can run testing mainly for Maven and Hyperdrive on actual listings, like real data. So right, so we're actually sourcing, we're buying things, and watch him go from he never knew that this was an industry and joining the company to he's actually sourcing, working with the prep center and everything, like 0 to 1. Um, that really helps everybody on the team who like watches or goes through that themselves understand. I see now why people get stuck here and here. And really, what you should be doing is this and that instead of the other things. We're kind of fortunate where we've built a lot of relationships, and this goes back towards the comment earlier about the importance of networking. Is like we've built the relationships to where if we have a problem, we can just text that person who I know is the expert on that. Just be like, "What do we do here?" And they're like, "Do this, perfect. We can move super fast." Um, but yeah, a little bit of a tangent there, but it's I guess my point is, there's a lot of pitfalls, and I think we could do an awesome job providing knowledge and guidance.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, with us having a little bit more hands-on experience and living that sourcing life, that inventory management life, that selling life, just being able to have that direct experience and know, like, hey, I understand this is where you may be having issues, but you actually solve that by spending more time in this area instead.
Mhm.
So just kind of having a little bit more expertise, especially in that kind of jumpstart phase where you're trying to go from 0 to 100 as quickly as you can and
Yeah.
may not know what you don't know just yet.
Yeah, and it's fun, right? Because we're doing something called dog fooding, our own tool, meaning we're actually using the thing we're building, which is fun because we get to just have crazy theories. Like, what happens if we put everything on Maven and take our minimum to 0% ROI? I don't know. Let's go figure it out, right? Like, we don't have to wait for users to do it and look at the data or be like, hey, like, could you do this? Like, we're not going to ask you to do that, but we get to do that ourselves and just be like, cool. You know, my theory is that it would not go well and that we would have horrible margins, but things would move fast. Well, turns out that didn't happen. Actually, the margin was very healthy, uh, and we moved things. So, downsides to putting your minimum at 0% ROI based on that sample, not bad. Not bad. Should you do that? Not necessarily, right? But it does start to give you some insights into how Maven works in a more macro perspective, right? If we take a step back here, we think about Maven as a model. Um, the more limitations you give a model, in theory, the worse the performance gets, right? It's kind of like this law of diminishing returns, right? You add a few, performance is going to get a little bit better because there are certain cases that you want to handle better. After that, though, you add more settings, more settings, more settings, and then eventually you realize, oh, I'm actually hindering the model from doing what it's designed to do because I want it done this exact way. I'm starting to notice this narrative, by the way, where Maven is a very different way to think about repricing your inventory. And we've had some people say, hey, like I want like these 10 settings. I'm like, get it. But let's think about what you want here. You're taking this complex AI model and you're giving it all these requirements, all these settings. What you're really doing is you're taking an AI model and you're forcing it to be a rule-based strategy, right? Which is like kind of this interesting hybrid, which I don't think you really need. I think it's like one or the other, right? I think having the customization to say, I have this very specific functionality I want. Great, go rule-based because you can do whatever you want. Or you got this, like, there's a lot of complexity here. Like, let Maven do its thing, and like, I'm good. Perfect. Let's do that, right? Like, that's, I think, the best of both worlds. There may be something slightly in between, but I think you have to think differently about this, right? I like this whole concept of like a co-pilot, which is like, it's either enabling you to make better decisions, right? So it's like, it's almost a peer in that sense, right? If you're using ChatGPT to help you write something, you're not necessarily saying write it for me and I trust it and it's perfect. You're saying no, like I just need some banter. I need to say, hey, I wrote this, but like, like I have this. This is my favorite use case of it. I have this crazy idea, this concept, and I can't articulate it very well. So I'm going to word vomit using text to speech. I'm going to give it to ChatGPT and say, hey, make this really concise. And then it does that. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I meant. I just didn't have the terminology, the language, or the articulation to like really get it where I need it. Great. Like now I can move forward. Right. So it's really assistive. Um, but then you have the version of a co-pilot that's really like doing the work for you. It has access to more data. And so if you have something that is designed to handle speed and complexity more so than you ever could, or even have access to that level of data, and you're saying, well, based on my limited data, I want to apply these limitations, it's going to create some hindrance on performance, from my opinion. Um, we're going to test a bunch of stuff, of course, right? There's some cases again where it makes sense to add some settings, some adjustments. Like I was talking to a user yesterday. I was like, yeah, I like this balance approach, but sometimes I really just want to push velocity, and I'm not really worried about profitability. I'm like, yeah, totally makes sense. But how do we go about solving that? Is that a simple slider, almost like a temperature, right? Where you're like it defaults to the balance, or you say, actually, I want more velocity or I want more profitability. These are things we're playing around with because there's a lot of variability there and opportunity. But yeah, it's an interesting pattern, right? I knew that as we launched this, people were going to have to think slightly differently because a lot of AI strategies people have been exposed to are not real AI strategies. It's really just more advanced algorithmic role-based strategies. Doesn't necessarily mean it's AI because it's you know what I mean. Like there is a difference, and so when you leap from really advanced rules to actual AI, you kind of got to start thinking differently. And I don't know, that's happening across everywhere in the world, and so it's like even myself when I'm trying to do something like internally, I'm like I'm thinking about this really wrong right now. But yeah, it's an interesting pattern. But I'm curious, Casey, if you've noticed any patterns related to Maven in terms of how people think about it or anything like that.
Yeah, in terms of Maven, I mean, there's obviously a lot of AI options out there. Like we mentioned, a lot of those AI options aren't necessarily true AI in their nature. So I think a lot of folks have either some sort of initial what's the expectation as to how Maven is going to work. And it does
Mhm.
work a little like slightly different from how some folks think it will work initially. I always recommend having a combination of rules based and Maven strategy within your account. Maven is great, but if you have very specific functions on certain listings on how you want them to behave and price against the competition, that's where you're going to want to have those rule based strategies set up with the specific details, kind of very
Mhm.
granular with whether it's, hey, I want this margin or want to price against this specific type of seller in this way at a certain time. That's where rules based is going to be best. And then if you have like, hey, these are my general listings that I just want to sell at the best price and get the best margin and move them as quickly or at a pace that's ideal, that's where you're going to want Maven. So kind of striking that balance is definitely very important within your account. And we did also just kind of help folks just get a little bit of insight into how Maven kind of thinks and approaches pricing listings. Finn, our other customer success or a head of customer success, did release or update an article called "How Maven's Logic Works." It's in our help center. I recommend checking it out if you have any listings on Maven that are maybe acting a little strange and you want to just check in on that logic, see why it may be working that way. And then, as always, I'll be in the chat as well if you see anything that may not seem right. Feel free to send it my way. I'll be happy to jump in and make sure that everything is working correctly. And if it's not, letting our team know so we can tweak things on our end as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we're tripling down on documentation internally and externally, which is exciting. So help.goor.com. If you're ever looking for, you know, a specific walkthrough or how does something work at a deeper level, go to help.goor.com. We intentionally, by the way, if you're jumping into chat and you're asking a question, our system will dynamically understand like what you're asking, find the answer, and then serve up that article for you. That's another way you could do it, which is kind of nice. And if we can't find it, the answer, that's when you go, great, send, and it goes to Casey or Finn, and we'll answer you directly, which is pretty good. But yeah, highly recommend that. Um, yeah, it's funny. It's less. You mentioned expectation. I think that's important because it's less about a expectation on performance and more an expectation as to the how it's done. And I think that's a really interesting point when I say like there's a gap between those two things. And I think what you just explained perfectly is that gap is the expectation on the how.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, you're seeing a lot of the how changing for a lot of tools, right? If you zoom out and go to the more broad e-com space, there's a lot happening right now, especially like the venture-backed e-com software companies. I think Triple Well's doing some interesting things too on the data analysis side, pairing that with like dynamic insights, AI, and stuff like that. I believe that's the correct example that I recently saw. Um, but yeah, so a lot of things are changing relatively fast. And what's nice is our challenge, which is kind of fun, is finding the balance between the user feedback we're getting, which is very direct, right? Like I want to always see the horizontal scroll wheel or the line. Great, you got it. It's like that, and then also like, where's the world going to be in 3 to 6 months, and like, how does that fundamentally change like who we are as a company? Sometimes it's like it doesn't, and other times like, oh, maybe, like it's hard to say. Um, I was even just looking on Twitter earlier. Amazon's basically changing the size of um, the description, I believe, for listings. I'm like, man, for keyword optimization for SEO, it just for me it totally makes sense to use some kind of AI system or a AI agent, which is like basically collections of large language models that have specific roles, and just be like, "Hey, here's an ASIN, here's the product, and then go find the best keyword, like update the copy and everything to make sure we're well positioned for it, and make sure you write the copy to be high conversion rate, right? Like not just stuff the keywords in there, but like write it in such a way that would lead to like really good conversion. I mean, at that point, imagine what happens if every time a seller jumps on a listing, that listing gets 3 times higher value in terms of SEO ranking and conversion rate. Imagine if we just increase the conversion rate by, I don't know, 10% on every product we as Orasol. Imagine that over time compounding. I mean that's incredible because now what you're doing is you're positively having an impact on the ecosystem, which is Amazon listings, even if you never sell on it again, but it didn't take you any effort, right? It was basically automatic and it would be so cheap to do as like a subscription that it wouldn't really matter. I kind of think about these things because just imagine the uplift if you could raise the average conversion rate on a SKU by zero point 0.1 even. It's just like the numbers are incredible. And what's crazy is things that would only make sense for private label brands and listings to do, where it's like if they increase it by 0.5%, like they're getting 100% of that. It's worth the effort. It's manual. It's never really been something you could automate because AI is relatively new anyways. That's starting to go away where it's like it still provides value, but now it's cost effective and not time restrictive. So now it kind of makes sense to consider, right? So I think what's going to happen, my light prediction, if you will, is you're going to have a number of tools that come out that take those things that were services and they will turn into code, right? You have agencies that they do listing optimization. You're like, hey, I pay per listing, per hour. You hire somebody, whatever. I think a lot of those are just going to become software, just going to become code with a large language model on the back end. That's just like, great, just, connect. I got this, like maybe minor human in the loop kind of things where it's like, it does all the work, but you just go in and you approve it, make a few tweaks and like you're good. So my long-term 5-year prediction is a lot of your Amazon agencies that don't deal with human things like negotiating contracts, sourcing, manufacturers. I think OA sourcing will go the way of code eventually, but a lot of that's going to go to code, which is just like crazy to think about because there are some agencies even that I know of that are doing like 20, 30 million a year in revenue. Like like that fundamentally shifts the ball game, right? Because now it's not a pay to play kind of game in the sense of can you afford the agency or can you not? That becomes like a big competitive advantage and more just do you want to pay $100, $500 a month for the software that's just going to do it for you at scale?
Right.
I think a lot of people will, right? You're already seeing this with customer support messages via Seller Central. You're already seeing this with basics like autoresponders, right? Like, hey, give me a review after everything. Like that's such a basic thing. But I mean, before that was a software somebody built, people were manually doing this and requesting. Like you would hire a VA and say, send emails out to every person that purchases from me and ask for a review so I can get my ratings up. Well, now you can really take that concept and apply it to the broader categories of services.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a lot about, having VAs and how in the next 6, 12, 18 months, a lot of those VAs will transition into AI assistants. And I think we'll kind of see that outside of the VA space as well, just in general, um, whether it's, data entry or any kind of manual task that you have to go in or someone on your team has to go in and do now. That'll absolutely, or maybe not all of those things, obviously, but the low hanging fruit, those will be automated and made in a way so that you can, like you said, hey, 80 to 95% of this is going to be taken care of automatically. I just go and make a couple tweaks in the last 5% or give it the thumbs up and let it run its course. So, yeah, kind of leveraging those tools and making sure you're up to date on any updates for the tools that you're using in your tech stack. Something we focus on internally, our support chat system and email system intercom. We're always making sure we're up to date on things there. So yeah, definitely recommend making sure if you have any platform newsletters that you're subscribed to, not just moving those to the trash can in the inbox. Maybe checking those out for a quick skim, making sure you're up to date there.
Yeah, it's funny. We use the term virtual assistant. Why virtual? Well, because they work remote and there's nothing physical that they do. It's all on a computer. Okay, so if we use the term digital to describe the difference, where like virtual means still a human and digital means not a human, the virtual assistant is just moving information around, right? Like they're making decisions, they're taking in information, they're scouring. Like a sourcing VA is a good example here. They are scouring pages, so they're getting information from pages, comparing that, so doing some kind of computational analysis, and then typically adding that to a spreadsheet. There's nothing human about that. And so I think anywhere where you're using a human as a seller, where there's nothing physical and there's nothing like it, if you have a VA, if you're calling everybody on your team a VA, I think you're doing a disservice, by the way. Like everybody should have an actual like title and role. Like if somebody's your head of purchasing, like call them the head of purchasing because that's what they do. Um, as they're making large decisions, like critical, um, non-reversible decisions, I think that's going to be okay for a while. It's the things where it's pretty straightforward, just time consuming. But what's so crazy is like the speed at which a computer, at which code software can do those same things is one, just fast by itself, but it's parallelizable, meaning if you wanted to go from having one VA sourcing 40 hours a week to sourcing 10 times that, well, now you got to go hire nine new VAs. But with code, you just go spin up nine more, right? Like there's a difference where you're not going to say, hey, all 10 digital assistants, as an example, go source vitacost.com at the same time, right? You're going to say, these are your 10, these are your 10, these are your 10. And by the way, they don't need to sleep. So just 24/7, they're just constantly doing this. And yeah, I think I've mentioned this internally, but like I've played around like on the weekends with just seeing what's possible. Like I'm not an engineer, so like if I can pull it off even one time, I'm like, okay, it's possible. It's for sure possible. I think it is. I think when you turn everything into a component, when you're talking like OA sourcing, it's definitely possible. It's challenging, and I think what will slow down this adaptation, this evolution, if you will, is that there's not enough money in the broader scope of tech where it's worth a lot of people coming in to like solve that problem, right? It's a very niche problem. And wherever venture capitalists, wherever funding is going towards starting companies, that's where the problems are going to get solved. And because of the way VCs and angel investors and stuff like that work, they need massive total addressable markets to make the math work and make it profitable. Amazon's not that large. So, could you raise a little bit of money and start a software company, go work on that? Totally. But are you going to have 3 to 5 companies come in actively competing, trying to solve it in various different ways, basically like experimenting really fast and in variable ways? I don't think you're going to have that really. So it's really going to take one person or ideally what happens is you take a company who is already working on the problem of sourcing profitable products. If that's the core problem that company exists to solve, and they're doing it via algorithms and stuff like that we've been having. I think those companies are well positioned to say we need to pivot, find a way to solve this. So what we're not doing is just running, basically scraping websites, but we're actually solving this problem in a modern way. Like if you were to do that today, how would you do it? And spin that up, right? Kind of what we did with Aura, right? We said, okay, we want to add a bunch of features, we want to do all these things, but like if we were to build it today, knowing what we know, would it be the same? No. All right, let's go fix that first, right? It's worth the effort, 18 something months, but it's so worth it. And I think hopefully there's at least one company, one software company that's already, again, working on that problem that's like, let's work on it from that perspective. I'm not very bullish on that. Unfortunately, I wish I could be more optimistic that that would be the case. I don't see it. I don't see a lot of talk or chatter around this. Even just AI and Amazon, right? It's very light touch stuff, and a lot of the conversations I see are very like outdated in terms of like, oh, like ChatGPT is sick. I'm like, dude, that was like 8 months ago. Like, we're way past that. We're on the exponential curve right now. Things are changing very fast. Which is why I think I like to talk about it a lot, either on my personal Twitter or like when we're doing these things. I like to talk about this because I want people thinking differently. I definitely geek out with it, probably way too much, but it's really cool. And I think the more conversations we're having, ideally, the more founders are like, man, like that makes a lot of sense. Like, let me go just try to solve this problem through that lens. Maybe there is something there, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I think, and like we've said before, I think that's an advantage of us as a team having experience as sellers. We're able to look at it from that specific perspective and know, like, hey, this is how this is built. Obviously, 1.0 total rehaul because we realized that hey, there were some issues in terms of setup or in the nature of the format of Legacy Aura. But yeah, just being able to look at it not just from business perspective, but the seller perspective. Make sure that we're thinking about it with that cap on and serving those folks the best.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of I've always said there's two categories of tools in the Amazon seller space. There's efficiency tools and effectiveness based tools. Repricing is one of the few that is an actual effectiveness based tool, meaning like it's doing the work for you. It's not just helping you update your price more efficiently, like it's actually doing it better than you ever could and faster. Efficiency based tools are, still amazing tools, but it's like really 95% of your tools, which is it's just helping you along, right? It's giving you better access to data, but like you're still doing the work, making all the decisions. But eventually, again, I think what's going to happen is a lot of your efficiency based tools will transition to being like repricing, like Aura, where it's like, I'm not trying to make it easier for you to do this. I'm trying to do it for you. And that's different. That's a very different perspective here. And yeah, this is why it's important that, we have our own internal account. We've been sellers, because like we understand how frustrating it is. And it's like stupidly frustrating, like beating your head up against a brick wall daily. And so for us, it's like, man, like how do we fundamentally understand what that is in term and what I mean by what that is, the what is like what is the machine, the processes of being an Amazon seller, and let's break each of these things down and say, okay, well, how would you do that today if you had access to these technologies or this knowledge? And a lot of times, even when we're doing this as a thought experiment, it's like, it'd be vastly different, totally different than the way everybody else is doing it. Whether that's, exactly how it would play out or not, right? A lot of these things are like thought experiments, right? Because some stuff, would be like the listing optimization, I think is cool, but it's like, would we ever do that? I don't know. It's not really like a priority. Like we have so many other impactful things we want to work on. But this does go to show how much opportunity there is in the Amazon software space to really solve some impactful problems because they're never ending. Even forecasting, a lot of the sellers we're talking to, we're looking at like analytics and stuff like that. They're like, man, forecasting is just painful. Like, I just want it solved. I'm like, yeah, makes sense. Like, of course you want it solved, right? And like, is that a solved problem? Is that not a solved problem? And then where we tend to think differently is that a solved problem in a different industry, but it hasn't been solved here? And we can basically port that over with some minor changes because there is going to be subtle nuances. And does that actually give us a meaningful change in the right direction? Right? Like this is where you have to be experimenting. And I think sellers need to be experimenting internally a lot as well too. You need to remember you're a business owner, not just buying and selling stuff, right? You can't be a flipper anymore. You really have to start thinking about what are the components that make up the business. Those could be areas of the business. That could be certain, processes. Like what is your process for sourcing? Do you know that you can sit down for 2 hours and churn out 50 profitable units, like on average? Do you know that? Well, if you do, now the question should become, well, how do you get to 100 in the same 2 hours? Or heck, how do you get to 100 units in 1 hour? Asking these kinds of crazy questions trains your brain to shift gears and say, well, let's solve that problem because that's far more impactful than let me just get a little bit better, right? That's incremental. I want more sellers to be thinking exponentially, not incrementally, right? Incrementally is get 10% better. Exponential is like, no, like that's a 10x magnitude, like massive change. Um, and sometimes it is as simple as like go hire a VA to help you source. Like you just, 10x your volume. Sometimes that's totally the case, but whenever I look at some of the largest sellers that I do know, they lean on software and act like a software company way more than you would ever imagine. I remember talking with Scott Needham back at like back in the day. So a lot actually, he actually runs a software company now, Smart Scout, which is awesome, right? Like he's a computer science guy, engineer. But even talking with him, it's like he's like, "Dude, everything runs on code internally, and he's doing wholesale." I'm like, "What do you mean? Wholesale's like you know hardcore relationship building and all these things." Like, yeah, but everything on the back end, like data, all these things. I'm like, yeah, man, it makes sense. It's like you can't. It's hard to get past a certain level without having code somewhere, just internally, right? Not just like software you're paying for off the shelf, but like sometimes you got to solve some custom stuff. So hopefully, this conversation is helping some sellers think a little differently, and hopefully shift your perspective to say, okay, I'm going to start viewing things from that lens and look at my problems a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks to just kind of get your hands on these things if it's intimidating to immediately implement things or make changes to your business setup. I'd encourage you to use them in your personal life, not necessarily obviously the tools that are geared towards Amazon selling, but myself, I've used AI and ChatGPT to help plan vacations, to help figure out, hey, like I want to cook some Italian food this week. Like, what are some good recipes you have? So just like starting to play with that and just getting a sense as to how those tools operate, and then being able to like, hey, I think this could really help me in this area of the business,
Yeah.
and kind of starting to do those things like that. I was able to plan a great vacation to San Diego in 25 minutes with everything booked instead of a few hours, and didn't have to do one Google search. So yeah,
Casey,
just
I
starting to kind
gotta
of
I
get
gotta
more foot
send
in there.
you a post. Somebody used basically solved that using AI agents. It's called Crew AI is the tech. It's open source, and you're like, I want to go here around this time. It goes great. Looks up the flights and everything for you. I'm gonna send that to you because it's like what you did.
Yeah,
Like if you did that degree in ChatGPT, you're gonna see what this like Crew AI thing did, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like would take probably 2 minutes. Chad, jumping in here, Chad Pruitt, working on the shift in my business, 7 figures a year rev, and everything is still so chaotic. Isn't that interesting, right? It's, I always come back to the law of entropy, right? It's like everything in life, personal life, at home, right? Like if I'm not, your job in a certain way is actively fighting entropy, right? Fighting the onset of chaos. So if I don't clean my home, if I don't take out the trash, well, I'm not doing anything bad, but I'm not solving the chaos. And so things will just get worse. It's kind of the same in business, right? It's like you go through phases where you're really on top of things, and then you have phases where as a business owner, as a founder, you're just like, I'm overwhelmed, and like some balls are going to have to get dropped. Sometimes that's okay, but it's so important to pause and be like, well, why is this chaos right now? Like I, the most recent one blog post we released this week was on reverse engineering goals. I'm going to use that same concept. So if you say, okay, well, the business is chaos. Okay, segment it. What is chaos? Is it things are not organized? Okay, what isn't organized? What area are not organized? And then you get down to, okay, well, what's the best way to organize it? And then you do that. Sometimes you could, it's a manual process. Other times you can automate it. It really depends, right? So what's nice about that though is you you look at the business as a collection of processes or a machine, right? If the machine sounds kind of wrong, you need to go in and figure out what specifically sounds wrong, right? So like my dad grew up like drag racing and all that stuff has like cars, so a lot of like mechanical work. And I remember, I was like, oh, it just sounds off. I'm like, oh, the whole thing? I was like, no. Like, I mean, yeah, the whole thing sounds off, but like it's clearly one thing, and you realize, oh, it's this one lug nut that's just not tight enough. But it makes the rest of everything feel chaotic and like it's going to explode. And so when you can really get down into the nitty gritty of that, you know exactly what to focus on. So if things are feeling chaotic, figure out exactly what, like pinpoint exactly what that thing is. A lot of times it's something small, and then make it a priority and say, things can't continue to go until I solve that. Because what is happening is your entropy that you're fighting is larger than it probably should be. So you got two options. You can either fight it harder, which is really hustling, or you could say, you know what, let me make this entropy monster a little baby mouse. Now it's easier for us to go work on that, and like we can keep going, right? Super, super important. Casey, any follow ups on that?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything there. I mean, yeah, as I think it's interesting, Vadim's comment in there. As you grow, more problems are going to continue to come up, and you got to kind of prioritize those problems that are going to have, or those problems that, when solved, are going to have the biggest impact for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's tough to prioritize those things and pinpoint things. So I'd recommend, wherever you spend most of your time, solve those problems first, and then work on those fringe problems as things grow and you have the bandwidth.
Yeah, and this is something that we recently, talked about this week in one-on-ones internally, which is like some problems you can't see. Some problems are invisible, and it's only visible in the data. And what's so interesting is like the thing you think is the issue is up here, but really when you go a few layers deeper, what is causing this major problem is actually down here, but that's not visible. And so, we take a lot of effort to make data more visible. And ideally, what we're trying to get to a point is not just like we have all the data, we can go manipulate it and try to find patterns and stuff. Is like ideally what can happen. This is where I want us to get to eventually. Is like these patterns emerge and are pushed to our team to be like, hey, like there's something interesting here. You should take a look. Versus us having to go into all the raw data, manipulate, and be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let me keep going with this. And this is something, again, this is what's so fun, right? It's like we have these problems or these concepts internally, and then we say, well, it's the same problem Amazon sellers have, right? You have the same problem, which is you have a ton of data, but it's not structured in a way to make it insightful and actionable for you. And a lot of times you have to go export it, go through Google Sheets. You have to know what kind of analysis to do. Most Amazon sellers are not data analysts or computer scientists, right? Like neither am I. And a lot of times you're having to combine information from this tool to this tool, figuring out how to overlap it, all these things. This is why I love things like Chat GPT, like your GPTs that people are creating. Like I created one that's designed for data analysis. I give it the files and I can have actual conversations with the data. I don't have to say, here's exactly the analysis we're going to run. I can say, hey, based on what I'm trying to attempt here, what is the best analysis? I don't know. And it says, well, here's two versions. Here's the one that's most recommended. Do you want to do that? Yeah, let's go forward with that. And now how do we take that, which is still pull, right? I still have to go do all that manually to Aura can just say, hey, we found an interesting trend. Here you go. And based on what we've seen, here's what's causing that. Here's what to do about it. Now, this is us theorizing and spitballing here. This is pie in the sky right now, so I'm not guaranteeing anything. But like, this is like an ideal end state that I would be so happy for us to get to from a product perspective, to where not only are we giving you more access to your data and making it insightful, we're actually giving you the insights and the recommendations as to what that means and what you should do about it. You're already busy. I think that's where we're transitioning to, which is not just, data is power, but like data plus recommendations from a model or a tool that understands it better than you ever could is a little bit better, right? You're going to make better decisions. You're going to move faster because they're just being given directly to you. I think that alone could fundamentally change what it means to be an Amazon seller, even just from our perspective, right? We're not even talking like listing optimization and all these other things. It's like just making your data contextual to you, explaining what's happening, even if you never saw it, right? Serving it up to you when it matters could be huge.
Yeah, especially because looking at data, a lot of times it gives you an insight, but then what do you do with that insight? Like, what's next?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, this is what I learned. Now, where do I go from here? So yeah, giving more pointed advice or recommendations around current states of whatever it may be is just going to kind of continue to influence and make an impact on that exponential growth
Mhm.
of the space, your business, whatever it may be.
Yeah. So if you like this kind of stuff, give us some feedback. This is what's fun about us setting up this feedback.goor.com site is it doesn't have to just be the specifics of like, oh, I would like this change or like this one feature. We really like, and like those are awesome. Like those are super helpful for us because we know exactly what to go do and it's super straightforward. But we also like I would like Maven to be able to do this crazy thing. I have no idea how, but like that's just like an ideal end state Like you guys need to figure out how to solve them. Yeah, that's our challenge, right? That's our job. So it's to me it's almost like Santa, right? Like come and be like, hey, I want this crazy thing to exist, or that I want to solve this crazy problem. Great. Some stuff we can work on, some stuff we're like, no idea how, like not really, something we want to work on, but still bring those to the table because at the end of the day, users vote, right? And if you bring something crazy to the table and 80% of our user base is like, yes, we're gonna pause. We're gonna ask ourselves, all right, we need to consider this, and it's fun, right? So I think for us, it's very fun to hear what is the problem you're trying to solve, your most painful problems, as well as what is the ideal end state you're trying to achieve? Like, what version of reality do you want to exist? Let us know that. Like, we're builders. That's what's fun. There's a lot of money, a lot of funding coming into the space, a lot of acquisitions happening, but like fundamentally, we're builders. This is why we haven't raised money. Like, we're not out here trying to acquire everyone. For us, it's like, no, like we want to go solve the problem. We want to build that solution because imagine the impact of solving those crazy complex problems. And for us, that's a driving factor, right? That's what gets us out of bed in the morning. Be like, yeah, it's gonna be horrible to work on and really tough, but like, imagine if we pull that off. Let's go. And I think that's really when you realize you're working on impactful stuff. Is when you're like, it's gonna be tough, but because nobody else wants to do the tough stuff. That's what's crazy. But yeah, that's my ramblings on that. So last one here, Chad. Speaking of feature requests, saw the request regarding Maven and suppressed buy box was updated to plan the other day. Anything you can speak on in regards to that feature? I can't go into the details right now, but it is something that was actually brought up today. So we're taking a look at that more seriously to figure out what makes sense. Like how do we solve that basically? Because there's a few different ways we can approach that. I can say it's basically being actively worked on. So right now it's like we're not just jumping into code. We're really kind of conceptually thinking about what makes the most sense there, and then moving straight to implementation. So I personally don't foresee that taking more than a few weeks, and I'm being very conservative here. Just barring any unforeseen things, but yeah, we're moving kind of fast, so it's kind of nice. There's suppressed buy boxes and Maven are it's interesting because some people want to handle it one way, others want to handle it another. And so we kind of designed it by default to handle it in what we think is the best way possible. But there's of course exceptions and stuff like that. And so we're trying to allow users to have a little bit more flexibility there. So definitely we'll have a solution out for you soon, which we're pretty pumped for. This is going to be the first addition to the first version of Maven that we've made since launching it. So it's exciting. There's a lot of UI stuff, UX stuff that a lot of users needed and wanted, like quality of life kind of stuff. We wanted to really get out fast, so we've worked through a decent amount of those things. Now we're getting back to like some deeper level stuff, Maven related. One of the ones that's under review right now is updating basically the range of data you can look at. Like that's going to change. Obviously, like going past 30 days, ideally, you could say, hey, show me last Thursday to last Saturday. Great, let's do it. So a lot of that stuff's coming, which is very, very exciting. Biggest issue right now with Aura. Well, luckily, this is why you bring us your biggest issues, so we can go and fix them. So great timing there. Very exciting. Let's see, I have one particular SKU. Current handling would have reduced my profit by only 5 figures easily. One SKU in particular. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, suppressed buy boxes, man. I wish they were a little bit better. Let's see. Appreciate the quality of life stuff as well. Repriced my whole store yesterday for the first time since the column sorting update, and it was a breeze. Love hearing that. Sometimes it's these massive new features, and other times it's like, make it easier for me to do this one action, So yeah, if you haven't already, you can basically customize your column layouts on the listings page. You could say, I want to see these things and I don't want to see these others, so hide them, and I want to see them in this order. Great, go do that. And that's specific to you, the user. So if you jump from one computer to another, or you have a VA have their own account, they can do all kinds of crazy stuff and it won't affect your version, which is fantastic. So it's persistent, right? So if you jump from web to mobile. It's persistent there, which is awesome. So we realized early on that the way users view their data, what they prioritize, and all that stuff is just so vastly different that the best solution was to say you set it up in the way that works for your brain and what you care about, and like just let that persist. Ideally, we wanted to have kind of like a persistent or like a good default, but just doesn't make sense. Let's just make it easier for you. So we'll wrap up here for time. Thank you everybody for coming. Again, we do these every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. Just a great way for us to be able to have a conversation, dive into some new stuff as it's coming up. Luckily, we're releasing things every single week now, which is awesome. It just gives you time to ask questions, us to share, and it's just a great time. So thank you guys for coming. Casey, any last words?
No last thoughts. If there's anything I can help you with, folks, I will see you in chat and I will see you next week as well. Thanks for jumping in.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.